Imagine you're Joe, 78, and excited about you and your wife finally being retired together. Your dream of retirement is simple. Pay off your house and sit on the front porch with your wife anytime you like. You drive your sister to an investment breakfast one morning at a local pancake house. She doesn't have a lot of money, and a local insurance agent guarantees her she will get the highest rate of return on her money if she invests with him. You were just the driver, but as you listened to the presentation, you became excited at the possibility of making sure you and your wife could finally travel, or maybe even buy a new car if you give the insurance agent all of your life savings of $120,000 to invest. It was great at first. You received monthly checks. The insurance agent made cash donations to your church and invited you and your wife to dinner at his house with his wife. At dinner, his wife offered to do your tax returns for free. You agreed, and you were so proud of the decision you made to secure you and your wife's future. But that changed for you when the checks stopped coming and you received a letter from the IRS wanting to collect on the $70,000 you owed them. How was that possible? Now, you and your wife are penniless, on welfare, drowning in debt, and starting over, fearful and ashamed. Imagine you are Frankie, a single mom who scraped by on pennies most of your life. In fact, your 4 children split one plate of food most nights for dinner. What your children didn't know was that you were saving all the money you could to open a tiny restaurant that would serve authentic food and leave a legacy of financial security for all of you. Your dream finally came true, and you opened your restaurant, lines around the corner every day. You are content. You have one adult daughter, however, who still lives at home and secretly resents you for raising her poor. You are tired and ready for help with the restaurant, so you ask your daughter for help. What a relief, and to have help with the restaurant and especially the financial responsibilities. After all, you are now 69. But the week your daughter goes on vacation, the bank calls, asking for their money. You find past due letters piled high in a desk drawer, and you are scared and confused. Your dream has slipped away. Imagine you are Regina, 81, a retired school teacher. You diligently saved your money for retirement. You are financially better off than most of your friends, but cannot afford a major crisis. Your husband died, and despite your profession, you don't know how to write a check, balance a checkbook, or navigate on your own financial affairs. Everyone knows you to be smart and capable, so you will figure it out. Except you don't. And instead of asking your kids for help, you ask your best friend of 50 years for help. Only she thinks it would be better if her son, a financial advisor, helps you because, he's up on all the technology and can teach you too. That sounds good. But what your friend's son was too embarrassed to tell his mom is that he had been unemployed for 6 months. You can imagine how this story ends. In fact, fill in the blanks, because every 4th person viewing today will be a victim of financial crime. And most certainly it will be a family member, and only one of you will report the abuse. Well, good afternoon. I am Julie Krawczyk. We're thrilled to be here with you today. I'm joined by the Honorable Brenda Thompson. I call her Judge Thompson, and Kinsey Stango with the DA's office. And we're really thrilled to share our model with you today, the Elder Financial Safety Center model. This is our 7th year of operation. We started back in 2014. And I think one of the things that it sounds like y'all are very aware of is the benefit of a multidisciplinary team. And so for us, we're really fortunate that not only do we have a formal collaboration between our three entities, it's pretty unusual to have a formal collaboration with a nonprofit and government agencies, but we also have a very diverse team of professionals. And so over the years, we've found that our MDT or multidisciplinary team experience has really brought us the opportunity to be efficient with our resources. We've been able to produce some amazing client outcomes that you're going to hear about a little bit later. Also, I don't know what Kinsey and Judge Thompson would say. I think I do, but I would definitely say my job satisfaction has been increased. And then the other thing that has been a really pleasant surprise with our collaboration is our opportunity to really address systemic issues in the community. And we get to do that by using the diverse and wide set of skills across our team. Another benefit of our collaboration has been the opportunity to reduce the duplication of services. In fact, it's allowed us to expand services, which are really important when resources are limited. And for anyone who is joining us today that cares about the bottom line, it generates a very healthy bottom line when you can collaborate the way we do. And so we're really proud to have a diverse spectrum of disciplines on our team. And so what we really hope to accomplish today by being here with you is to share what our model is, what worked for us, how we got it started, where we're at today, and provide you with some information, resources, and tools to help you further advocate for the work that you're doing in your own communities around a coordinated effort. We really strive to fiercely protect our older adults in the Dallas community, like we know you do since you're here joining us today. That's me. So, all right. While you're kind of reading what you see on the screen, I think what's really important here about what you're seeing is that, you know, for us in the Dallas community, we had to really convince the Caruth Foundation that financial abuse was a public safety issue in the community. And it's kind of like I equate it to a raging river, a raging storm. It's just wiping out older adults, their income, their ability to thrive, to live independently. We really had to communicate that message. And when I say really had to communicate it, I mean it took 10 years of research, coordination, and talking across the community. And also, we had to convince them that this was not just a problem of the rich. I think there's a big misconception, or at least there was for us in our community, that it only affects people of wealth. So we know financial abuse, it doesn't matter what race you are, what gender you are, it doesn't matter how much money you have, and the list goes on. It impacts everyone. And so we really had to convince our funders and community partners of that. And we were fortunate enough after about 10 years and after convincing the funders that this was a public safety issue for older adults, we received a $1 million planning grant. At that time, we had a very expansive team that included the prosecutors from the DA's office, law enforcement, the medical community, educators, researchers, volunteers, I mean, adult protective services, you name it. We had a very big committee of people to talk about what could it look like in our community for us to work together. And so from that, we developed this core team, which you see the three of us here are the core center leadership. And then we have a bigger team of people that we work with and then other external partners. And so once we got to that place, we secured a $4.5 million implementation grant over 5 years. And so this is really the foundation of the belief, which is that financial safety is a gateway issue to public safety for older adults. You know, when you think about financial safety, financial security or insecurity for that matter, we know that it affects every single decision any one of us makes, from housing to health to transportation. Now, for our clients and victims at the Elder Financial Safety Center, they fall on financial hardships quite often. That could be because they're a victim of a financial crime. It could be that they just didn't have the resources or ability or access to get those resources over a period of time. And we see that our older adults are forced to make really tough decisions when it comes to their essential needs. And so this is part of the reason we base our services, that you'll see on the next slide what they're like, because we know that our older adults first are going to give up food. That's always the first thing they're going to give up when they're experiencing a financial hardship. Then they give up transportation. Then it's medication. And this one always kind of hits me pretty hard because I think about the fact that most medication, you need food to go with that medication. So not only are they financially not well, they're physically now not well because they don't have access to the resources. And then the last thing we see older adults giving up when they've been victims is their housing. They will fight tooth and nail for their housing. And like you and like all the clients that we serve, we never want to see anyone have to choose between these very basic and essential needs. And so because of that, we created the Elder Financial Safety Center model. It's a comprehensive one-stop shop for older adults who can enter through any one of the collaborators, whether that's through the prevention services at the senior source, protection services at probate court, prosecution services at the DA's office. We really wanted this to be streamlined, easy for the public to access our services. So there is one director. We share one database that we can access anywhere in real time, and we see the client as one person. And I think that makes a big difference from where we were at just 7 years ago, where sometimes we didn't know what the other person was doing, or we were doing things in silos, individual of each person. And in some cases, we were waiting for different entities to complete what they were doing before we got access to the client. And so that is no more, and we're really proud of the effort. So we consider our model to be cutting edge because we cut through all the red tape to develop this center. And so we're going to talk a little bit, each of us, to you about the specific services of the center. I'll kick it off with prevention, and then we'll talk more about what a model could look like in different communities. So at the Senior Source, we are the largest nonprofit aging social service agency in North Texas. The prevention services are housed here at the Senior Source. And I say here because that's where I'm at today. And we have, for prevention, a 12-member team. And so we are the first of its kind center in the nation. We are the first social service agency in the nation and the only that we're aware of, from what our partners share with us, who are helping with financial advocacy and financial abuse advocacy for adults and exploitation one-on-one. So that could look different for each person, whether they've been a victim of identity theft, whether they've been exploited by a family member, or they've been scammed by a stranger. We at the Senior Source manage all of those cases. We treat each case like any other type of trauma, whether that's a car crash, whether that's someone who's a survivor of domestic abuse. We recognize that trauma and we triage. We triage here among the services we offer, and we triage with our collaborators and our other external partners. And I think a lot of you, I'll just go out on a limb and assume that you understand that a lot of the reason older adults don't typically report is because they are embarrassed, they are ashamed, they feel worthless. In our community, they already feel invisible. And oftentimes I've been a witness to other adults telling that older adult, you should have known better. And so that doesn't make it a very comfortable environment to want to report, and we're working to change that. I do want to tell you just quickly, I know I shared stories with you earlier, and I want to I'll share where those each individual clients and victims are at. But one of the very first clients that I had here when I started this job was a woman who was in her 80s. And when I met her, it was because of a very interesting experience. The U.S. Postal Inspector called me and said, we believe not only is she a victim of a crime, but she's also participating in the crime. She told me when I met her in person for the first time that she knew she was being scammed. She absolutely knew it. But the scammers were her friends. They were the only people that ever called her. They were the only people who checked on her. And she knew that she was giving her money away. She knew she shouldn't be doing that. And because they took all of her money, she couldn't afford to pay her mortgage. So as long as she participated in the scam with them, they paid her mortgage. And I think, that story really, it impacts me because I never want anyone to feel vulnerable or isolated in a way that they're being victimized, and even if they're being victimized by choice. And so some of the ways that we can address those situations when someone's victimized or limited resources here at the Senior Source, we are a national benefits center, enrollment center with National Council on Aging. We can help people get the state benefits that they need when they're victimized, usually to create that bridge between financial sustainability versus security, because ultimately we want every older adult to live independently as long as they're able in their own home. And I want to talk specifically about Joe for a minute, because in Joe's case, he had to make a decision after he was scammed about what he was going to do. And at his age, he chose to go back to work, and we offer employment services here. And we had to help him with state benefits short term until he was able to get a full-time job that met his needs. Now for Frankie, benefits for her was a longer term solution to financial security. Frankie's not proud of that experience that she went through. And I will also tell you, it's a very popular question I get, so I'm just going to answer it now. She chose not to prosecute her daughter, which is her choice. And it's hard to accept. And so the best thing we can do is wrap around other prevention services to support her. And then in Regina's case, it turned out that Regina didn't have an aging disease. She experienced what most of us do starting at age 35, which is frontal lobe decline. And that's where your financial decision making is made. That's where your capacity decisions are made. And so fortunately for Regina, we have a money management program here. We're able to connect her with a volunteer who's trained and vetted, helps her go through her checkbook, her bills, and ensures that she is protected from being victimized ever again. And so we handle a lot of different, really diverse cases here at the Elder Financial Safety Center, the prevention arm of it at the Senior Source. Over the years, we've quickly become the experts in dealing with financial exploitation cases. We collect a lot of data around the work we do. We've worked with the Attorney General's office, the FBI, Texas Department of Insurance, FINRA, you name it, we've probably worked with them, in addition to our collaborators. And so when we are working with someone who's been victimized and we recognize that there is absolutely nothing else we can do from a prevention standpoint, that's when we call in our collaborator at the probate court. And so Judge Thompson is going to talk to you a little bit more about the services of probate court.
Good afternoon. Let's see. All right, I hope I'm on your screen. I am Brenda Thompson, as previously identified. I'm a statutory probate judge in Texas. In Texas, we have specialized probate courts in the 10 most populous areas in the state. And the statutory probate judges have exclusive jurisdiction over guardianships, trust, and estates. That means that we handle a lot of guardianship work. In Texas since 2011, we've had more than 60% increase in guardianships. And right now we're pretty close to 60,000 guardianships across the state. Now, as you know, guardianship is a legal relationship created by the court with respect to a person and a person's estate with another person or entity for their protection of the person as well as the person's resources. Guardianship is statutory. And I've done a little research, and I know that North Carolina statutes are very consistent with, or they're consistent with what we do in Texas. So there are specific rules for the creation, administration, modification, monitoring, and termination of guardianships. The usual, and you're under the, you use the usual mandate that we focus on alternatives to guardianship, such as powers of attorney, management trust, and temporary injunctions, or other types of legal instruments to protect the resources of an affected person. But the overarching concept is that we are providing protection while respecting individual rights, while we are looking at the needs of the individual. And as I said, trying to do an assessment of what needs to be protected, as well as respecting their freedom of choice and independence. So the cornerstone of creating a guardianship is careful assessment of the person. We look at what is the degree of incapacity, what responsibilities need to be assigned, what responsibilities need to be assigned to whom, what degree of vulnerability to fraud, exploitation, and abuse are we seeing, what resources are available to the affected person, and what resources are available in our community. On the slide, you'll see that we have a panel that talks about annual monitoring for all wards. Whether the person is called a ward or an affected person, or called a person under for whom protection is necessary, we specifically continue to look at the issue of the person's privacy as well as transparency for delivery of services. So who are the essential players in this dynamic? Who are the people who we rely on? Of course, we rely on the multidisciplinary team approach. We look at physicians, we look at the assessments of care assessment people, investigators, family, kinship relationships, and all appropriate public and private agencies. Another aspect of what we do when we're looking at a guardianship situation for an individual is we try to anticipate down the road future events. We don't want to, we have a provision that allows us to, in statutes, most state statutes allow modification. And so we want to be prudent in terms of what we do initially, but we also don't want to set up a situation that won't last long term. So we're looking at what is in the best interest of the affected person, as well as what's available and what we can do. Now, we all know that there are increasing environmental threats out there. One of the most recent and most talked about environmental threat to elderly people and people with disabilities, as well as veterans, is the continuing opioid crisis in our community. Addiction is a problem in our community, addiction and mental illness. Another environmental factor that we have to look at is the lack of adequate planning by people, because of they've not anticipated longer life expectancies, and they don't have sufficient resources planned out for disability or for premature death of a spouse. We also look at the effects of social isolation. We look at, and of great concern is government benefit fraud. That is epidemic at this point in time in our society. So we're trying to protect as well and work with the senior source, the protective services, the prevention services aspect, to do what is best for the affected person. Now, of course, the guardianship process varies by jurisdiction, but usually in every jurisdiction, there is a specific concern for due process. In other words, we are really concerned that we respect the rights, the needs, and the interests of the affected person. We look at whether or not they have an opportunity to be heard, to understand what's going on. And so most statutes require, excuse me, the appointment of attorney ad litem. In some cases, we'll also have what's known as a guardian ad litem. In Texas, a guardian ad litem means a person who is looking at the best interests of the ward or affected person. And that person doesn't have to be an attorney. Now, the statutes in Texas, and I believe in other states, may provide for pre-need designation of guardians. Okay, in other words, before you need a guardianship, you may be able to designate a guardian of your person or guardian of your estate. But like so many other things, sometimes things change. And so that designation may not be binding on the court, and it may not be appropriate when the time comes. And it may not be a sufficient designation to protect the affected person. And so we try to do and structure guardianships or services that reduce abuse and that ensure quality care of the affected person. Now, we work very closely with the other arm of our team, that is the district attorney's, the prosecution unit, as well as law enforcement, because governmental agencies as well as volunteer agencies and volunteers are essential to monitoring the guardianships. And that's a critical facet of our program. And so in our courts, we utilize not only volunteers, retired nurses, retired insurance people, but we also utilize social work interns, master level social work interns who will go out and visit people under guardianship. In other jurisdictions in Texas, they utilize people in the allied health professions. And we have a specific assessment form that they utilize when they go out to monitor the guardianship, and they look at they look at the physical structure or physical residence where the ward resides. They look at the medications. They ask questions about the services, the social interactions, the financial management of the ward's resources. There's an annual requirement in our state for a report on the status of the ward and physical status, and also an annual accounting requirement if there's a guardianship of the estate. We work very closely with Adult Protective Services to look at situations where a person is aging out of their role as a guardian. Sometimes we have parents who are guardians of young children, and the young children are now seniors, and that means that their parents are seniors. So they may, and on the screen it says removal of unfit guardians, but it's not always that the person is unfit. It's just that sometimes the job gets bigger than their capacity to handle. And so we've had situations where a person who started out as the guardian had disabilities themselves and wound up needing a guardianship. The court I preside over was established in 1957. And so some of our guardianships that were established in 1957, the guardians in those cases have gotten too old to be guardians, and they need guardians themselves. And so, and of course, life happens to people. And so they're changing roles. You know the statistics. You know that 10,000 people a day are turning 65. You know that more and more people are being transitory. They're moving from place to place. A lot of people are moving to North Carolina. A huge number of people are moving to Texas. And so we are challenged to meet their need. And as they move, the opportunities for fraud, abuse, and exploitation multiply. Unfortunately, scammers and people who want to commit crimes follow the crowd. And so it is essential that we refine our techniques for detecting fraud and abuse and exploitation. In Texas, I'm required to bond assets, any liquid assets. Okay, I don't bond on the value of a person's home, but I do bond a guardian of the estate for the value of their liquid assets. That is any kind of asset that can be easily converted into cash or easily taken away from the affected person. Also, part of what we do is we look at educating the guardians, helping them access services, helping them find ways to work more effectively with the affected person. And of course, that goes to the collaboration piece with Senior Source as a benefit center. We try to make certain that we interface not only with Senior Source to make certain that we take advantage of anything that could be available to a person under guardianship, either as a least restrictive alternative or as an option in lieu of a guardianship. We are always looking to set up a circumstance that would obviate the need for the creation of a guardianship. Now, I'm here to tell you that most guardianships granted in our state are successful across the country. They're very successful, even though the statistics show that most fraud is committed by family members. But I will tell you that there's so many more success stories than there are horror stories that I feel compelled to say that guardianship is working. It's working for most people. The criticism sometimes has been that we don't anticipate all of the circumstances that a person that can happen in the course of a guardianship. And I want you to understand that guardianships can only anticipate what's in, a judge can only anticipate what's in front of them. We don't have any crystal ball. We can't look down the road to see what might come up that might affect a ward. But the courts are open to modification. They're open to restoration. Sometimes a person, for example, a person with a traumatic brain injury makes a substantial recovery and no longer needs a guardianship or no longer needs a full guardianship. They may need a more limited guardianship. And that's why, you know, they may need somebody to handle money management for them, but other things they can handle by themselves. So we appreciate those people who are joining with us in the effort to combat elder abuse, fraud, and exploitation. We appreciate the people who are in the vanguard with us to help us detect and prevent fraud and exploitation and abuse. And we are available to answer any questions that you might have with respect to how our collaboration works and how best to utilize the resources in your community. Our model is not the exclusive model for doing what we're trying to do. We use the resources that were in our community, and we encourage you to approach the persons who are in your community to assess what resources you have, to assess the need that you have. And as Julie mentioned, the key thing is collaboration. The key thing is having a common dialogue, having access to common information and data so that we can all accomplish the objective of protecting vulnerable populations. We are on the vanguard. We are the people who are interested and concerned. If seniors lose their resources, if disabled people lose their resources or don't have access to resources, you know what the bottom line is. You know that that means it's a crisis for all of us. So I encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. We appreciate what you're doing. And we're here to share our knowledge and expertise and to cheer you on in the fight against elder abuse, exploitation, and fraud. And with that, I'll turn it over to our enforcement person for prosecution, Ms. Stango. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Thompson. All right, like Judge just said, my name is Kinsey Stango. I am a prosecutor in the Dallas County District Attorney's Office. I'm going to start by giving you guys a little bit of the history of how elder exploitation started in our office, and with the advent of the MDT, kind of where we are now, and how we've progressed. So in our office, we have had at least one prosecutor designated to handle cases of elder exploitation since 2007. We're really proud of that fact. We were really one of the only DA's offices in our area, I think most of the state, to do that at the time. So we really did recognize it early on and tried to have a response. Now we actually have our very own unit. We have a team of prosecutors, an investigator, and last year we actually added a victim advocate to the team. So we're super excited about that. I have personally had the privilege of prosecuting in the elder abuse unit and being a part of this team for just over a year now. And I requested to be transferred into this unit because I think the work that's being done is it's so important and so essential. So I can tell you firsthand that prosecuting these cases can be very difficult for a lot of reasons. They can be very large in size and in scope, just the amount of evidence that it takes. And quite frankly, it can require a lot more time and attention than an average criminal case. And unfortunately, sometimes, even after spending a lot of time investigating these types of offenses, successful prosecution isn't possible. And because these cases are so complex, I can tell you that both, social service-based systems and the judicial system are absolutely essential in resolving these complicated crimes. So generally, these systems, they act independently in service of different goals, right? But with this MDT, like the Elder Financial Safety Center, it provides a bridge. It provides a collaboration between these groups, and we've seen quite a bit more success. So one thing that may surprise you is that most of the cases that we received for elder exploitation that we investigated and prosecuted prior to our multidisciplinary team actually did not come from law enforcement. So elder abuse and exploitation was an area that historically had just not gotten a lot of attention from the law enforcement community, and not just in Dallas, but throughout the country. And it's not that law enforcement didn't care. It's just that a big reason was that we're at least 20 years behind in addressing cases of elder abuse as compared to like fields like child abuse and family violence. There is currently no standardized way to recognize or screen for elder abuse. And so not surprisingly, there's no standardized checklist for assisting these victims of the abuse. One of the major reasons is that the fact that crimes against vulnerable adults, they tend to co-occur. So it's not just one discipline that's incorporated. These can incorporate multiple areas like physical and sexual abuse, family violence, neglect, mental health, drug abuse. And then on top of all that, there's usually a financial component involved as well. So in most cases, you're just not going to find a detective, a prosecutor, or even a social service organization who has this specialized expertise in all of these areas. And that, again, is why establishing this type of group is absolutely key. It facilitates the opportunity to train against different process of discipline. So the elder abuse is not only one of the most underreported, but it's also one of the most under-recognized crimes. Cases of financial exploitation oftentimes are shrugged off as civil in nature rather than criminal. They're just not investigated and ever even reported to the DA's office in the first place. And again, I say this is not because of law enforcement doesn't care. Please don't take that from what I'm saying. It's just a lack of information, I think, and tools and training in that area. We knew back, the limited number of cases that we were receiving at the DA's office was just the tip of the iceberg. We didn't know how many victims, were not getting their cases reviewed or investigated, but we definitely knew that elder victims in our community weren't receiving equal access to justice. And obviously that just was unacceptable. So something else that we encountered working on these types of cases prior to our NDT is that with the victims whose cases that we were made aware of and that we were able to review and even prosecute, our role in the situation was limited to prosecuting the perpetrator of the crime. We weren't able to meet the immediate and ongoing needs that these elderly victims of exploitation faced after the crime occurred, whether we were able to successfully prosecute or not. I mean, think about it. We're talking about victims who have had their entire life savings depleted, their homes wrongfully deeded, victims who had their identity stolen, their credit ruined, maybe power of attorney had been abused, or who may be in serious need of protection from the courts through a guardianship like Judge Thompson was talking about. So these folks, they all needed help beyond the limited role that we at the DA's office played in their situation. And sometimes these, needs were immediate, and sometimes they continued long after our criminal case had come and gone. And with the creation of the Elder Financial Safety Center, it allowed us at the DA's office to address each of these challenges in a way that we knew would actually make a difference, before and after prosecution for this elderly population. The funding of the EFSC allowed us at the DA's office to establish this unit that I was just talking about, and we are solely dedicated to investigating and prosecuting cases of elder abuse and financial exploitation. So every case that is on my docket is an individual that is disabled or 65 years of age or older. We don't do any other types of cases. With the funding, we've been able to grow. Like I said, we've got a team of 2 prosecutors now, hopefully adding another this summer. And we have an investigator. And again, like I said, our new victim advocate, whose all of their jobs are specifically for elder abuse. This also provides us, an opportunity to become experts in our own field. It gives us a larger presence within the community as well to be able to go out and shed some light on this problem. So one of the first things that the Elder Abuse Unit has done through the EFSC was to develop and provide law enforcement training in an area of elder abuse and exploitation to law enforcement personnel at all levels within all of our local law enforcement agencies. And I'll tell you, up until this point, the law enforcement in our community, they received virtually no training on these types of offenses, how to investigate them, and how to build a good case and how to recognize them. So with our MDT, we have seen an incredible response from law enforcement agencies in our jurisdiction that are interested in receiving this training. And then, of course, obviously with that training, we have seen an increase in the number of elder abuse and exploitation cases that we've received directly from law enforcement. And you can imagine with training and education, these detectives can take those tools out and they can build, good cases, know what they need to go and get, know what kind of evidence they need in order for us at the DA's office to successfully prosecute these perpetrators. So our goal is to educate law enforcement professionals in our jurisdiction on how to identify all these types of crimes that can occur with elder individuals, and assure them that the hard work that they're doing out there in the field and out there in the community would, be prosecuted and taken seriously at the office. Also with all this law enforcement training, we're able to direct law enforcement to direct these victims to the center directly themselves, right? So now they recognize it, they know where the resources lie. So we are working with law enforcement personnel to make elder abuse and exploitation a recognized law enforcement issue area, just the same way that it is for family violence and child abuse. You know, like I said, elder abuse is about 20 years behind. And so we are taking great strides to make elder abuse a priority, just like child abuse, just like family violence. Something that that'll make a significant difference for our elderly victims is to establish the Elder Financial Safety Center, is that we have a resource for these victims that we just didn't have before too. So that's been huge. Whether or not we're able to successfully prosecute their cases, these elderly individuals can now have a place to turn when, you know, we may not be able to help, but now we have some place where we can send them for assessing their needs to go forward. And regardless of whether, you know, we can successfully prosecute or whether they need to be a part of the guardianship process, through the EFSC, their immediate financial needs will be addressed, which can be the most crucial, right? And we can ensure the safety of those most vulnerable victims. Another great thing is that we're also now in a position to identify these elderly victims who might be incapacitated and in need of a guardianship. Those individuals may not have, you know, anyone to step into those roles, you know, or worse, we uncover that the person, you know, who's been in that role has taken advantage of that vulnerable senior. So these individuals, you know, our community's most vulnerable members, you know, are no longer left on their own. Through this collaboration and the coordination of all the efforts of this team, we're definitely changing the way that we care for our elderly community in Dallas. And we hope that the Elder Financial Safety Center can serve as a model that can be replicated, so that hopefully, you know, you can see the successes that we've had in our community as well. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of just kind of the progress that we've made, you know, I think numbers always speak volumes. And so, as you know, we created this team in 2014. And since then, we've been able to impact over 30,000 victims, you know, in some way or another. We've protected at least $130 million from getting into the wrong hands and staying with the seniors that need it, who depend on it. And we've educated 52,000 people across the country. And obviously that number grows all the time. So, and we're really proud of those numbers. And I know that, you know, as we continue to educate and get the word out, you know, these numbers will continue to grow as well. I'm going to turn it back over to Julie.
All right, so this is just an example of what our model is. So we've already talked about that. We're not going to spend a lot of focus here. And then the rest of us can all kind of join in to talk about what a model could look like. So normally when we go to conference presentations, we look at the resources that are available in the community. I will say North Carolina, just a little plug, is pretty progressive. I would say very much equal to a lot of the work that we're doing, and we're thrilled to see it, to help, to be a part of it, to learn, and to continue to grow from you as well. But for communities that may not have all the aspects that some of us have, we talk to them about what are the community-based services and organizations that you have. Who is the chief law enforcement officer or, entity in your state or in your county, or however, it's different for each of us. And what type of financial institution, financial collaborator, who do you have access to? And a lot of times we'll talk about something a lot less structured and formal like ours. Just start with some referral coordination. Maybe have a meeting once a quarter to talk about some complicated cases. You know, in every community, we have a Miss Jones or a Mr. Smith or someone who has touched every single agency at some point. We've all interacted with that person and we're at a loss. And so we come together, we coordinate that case, we bring in other experts who we may need. And so we just, usually encourage people to start off slow, just start coming together. The other thing that I think is really important is that there are many financial resources out there. You do not have to be an expert, whether you're an officer, whether you work at the courts, whether you're a volunteer, work in the community. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and other agencies have developed curriculum. We use Money Smart for older adults. It's free. We taught ourselves how to do it. And we partner with other agencies, financial institutions. We partner with community groups to spread the word about how to financially protect yourself, whether that's financial literacy or protecting yourself from exploitation and abuse. And so, again, we look at, and Judge Thompson mentioned some of this in her comments as well, what are the resources? And I like to say, and I don't get tired of saying it because it matters. It's what matters. Who is the best first person you can reach out to that you know who can help? Then that's a springboard to bring other people together. And so I think that's really important. And Judge Thompson, did you want to add anything before we take questions? I think we just have a few more minutes. We want to make sure you'll have the information to connect with any one of us. And Judge, if you have something to add, otherwise we'll turn it back over to Laura.
Well, I just wanted to add that don't be afraid to reach out to your local Rotary Club, your local churches, your local legal societies. All of these people can be resources for helping in the community. We have had occasion in our county where we didn't have a specialized resource to help veterans. And so we reached out to some of the veterans associations and said, you know, can you help us with people who are disaffected in the community? Can you help us if we put them under if they're under guardianship? What can you do to serve your fellow man, to be part of the vanguard, to be part of the force against evil in our society that wants to strip people of their resources and their life savings and to do exploitation. And so you have not because you don't ask. And so you can go to your local groups, your civic groups, your legal groups, you can go to the taxi cab driver groups and real estate professionals. There are all sorts of places to start to find people who are willing to help in the fight against exploitation. There are insurance agents who can tell you about, who can do a little short presentation on identity theft. There are former DAs, there are former people who can tell you how to lock your credit account so people can't get information. So you just need to be creative in terms of reaching out in your community and networking to bring as many people as possible into the group, into the cube, to fight exploitation, abuse, and fraud. So I'll turn it over for questions.
What a fantastic presentation. Thank you all so much. Very informative and encouraging. So thank you for that. Debbie Lee does have she has two really great questions. She would like to know, what were the key advocacy and policy changes that your MDT took to move from just a group to the development of the center? And she also wants to know whose mind was the hardest to change.
Are really good questions. I know, and Judge Thompson, you jump in here because Judge Thompson really has been at the forefront of this from the beginning. She is a champion for our work. I will add, for us, we had a case that we all worked on together. This is really how the brainchild was started. And so I think through that case, and Kinsey mentioned that, we saw the power of working together. And so then it's cutting the red tape. There was a lot, I know there was a lot of back and forth and negotiation, but we had formal, for 5 years, we had formal memorandums of understanding between all of our entities. We did a lot of advocacy at our community court. And there was a lot of buy-in. There's a lot of passion for older adults in our community. And so on the community level, I think at the commissioner's level, we had a champion as well. And Judge Thompson, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I just want to say that it was not hard to change people's minds. Everyone seemed to be aware of somebody who had lost their life savings, or who had made a poor investment, or who had been taken advantage of. And by the way, you don't have to be a senior to be taken advantage of. You just don't read the fine print and you get taken advantage of. You don't look at your restaurant bill and you see that there are 5 drinks that you paid for instead of 2. Okay, so you don't have to be a senior, or you don't have to be a disabled person. You don't have to be a senior or disabled person to have your identity theft, be identity. And all the frauds and scams that are out there, the sweetheart frauds, the scams, there's so many things. So you will not have hardly any resistance to overcoming fraud in your community. Lots of people just need to be aware of the fact that they can contribute. Some people sit back and wait to be asked. So I'm a person who asks.
That's a really great point. Thank you. John Marin has a couple of good key points. He says you can contact your state securities regulator for help with investor education, protection presentations. Here in North Carolina, that would be me, John Marin, or Ann Elmore. His email is jmarin@sosnc.gov, and he lists Ann's email. He also says that they can work with the NCAG's Consumer Protection Division and the SHIP Senior Medicare Patrol and conduct scam jams around the state. One more point he has is for other collaborations, folks can join the NC Partnership and the NC Seniors Consumer Fraud Task Force. Stephanie Bias and John are the co-chairs of the task force, and the people can reach out to either of them. So that was just some resources for folks here in North Carolina. Brian, Don, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I want to thank John for sharing that. It's really important. That is an example right there of just taking that one extra step to share the information, empower others to use it. So I appreciate. It's literally advocacy right now in action. It's amazing.
Brian Donahue has a really great question. He's asking Judge Thompson, if do you see an increasing number of guardianship cases with wards suffering more from mental illness diagnoses like schizophrenia and intermittent explosive disorder than those suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's? He just commented that guardianship caseloads here in NC are doing more and more towards severe mental illness.
The answer is yes, and we call them mixed diagnosis cases. We have people who have disabilities and also who have mental illness, and mental illness can foster a situation of disability. Our courts, we have one court that is devoted exclusively to mental illness. And as a result of the pandemic, of course, the pandemic has accelerated the number of mental illness cases, and it has also accelerated the number of guardianship cases and the interface or interaction between the two situations. So yes, there is an increase. There's an increase, actually, it seems like from every direction at this point in time. And as I said, the guardianship thing, even though we work really hard not to put people under guardianship or limited guardianship, it is basically off the chart. I mean, 60% increase since 2011 is pretty spectacular.
Wow, that's a hard stat. Well, I don't see any other questions, but I just wanted to say thank you all so much. You have a really great example of what folks can look up to. So thank you so much for your time and your great presentation. We really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Have a great one. So if everyone wants to just click on leave the breakout room, that will bring you back to the main meeting room, and we will hear for our final keynote